Iskandar. Iskandar. A village near the river Euphrates, 1962-7. Pem was a woman of untenable thoughts and unfounded fears. This part of her personality wasn't something that had evolved over the years. Instead, she had turned superstitious abruptly, almost overnight, the night Iskandar was born. Pem was 17 years old when she became a mother, young, beautiful and apprehensive. There she was in a room bathed in a dusky light, staring at the cradle, as if she was still not convinced that this baby with his pink, fragile fingers, translucent skin and a blotchy purple mark on his button nose had defied all the odds and survived, that he would, from now on, be her child, hers alone. Here was a son, the son that her mother had craved and prayed to have throughout her entire life. Nays had had one more full-term pregnancy after Pink Destiny and enough beauty. It had to be a boy this time, there was no other possibility. Allah owed her this, he was in her debt, she said, even though she knew she was speaking utter blasphemy. It was a secret agreement between her and the Creator. After so many girls, he was going to make it up to her. Such was her conviction that she spent months knitting little blankets, socks and vests in a blue deeper than stormy nights, all of them designed for her perfect little boy. She wouldn't listen to anyone, not even to the midwife who examined her. After her waters broke and told her, in a voice as quiet as the breeze, that the baby wasn't positioned right, and that they had better go to the city. There still was time. If they set off now, they could be at the hospital before the contractions started. Nonsense, Nays retorted, holding the midwife's eyes in her fiery stare. Everything was fine. Everything was in his hands. She was 49 years old and this would be her miracle child. She was going to give birth here in her own house, in her own bed, as she had done with each and every baby before, only this time it would be a boy. It was a breech birth. The baby was too big and it was pointing the wrong way. The hours passed. Nobody counted how many, for it would bring bad luck. Besides, only Allah was the owner of time, the divine clockmaker. What was unbearably long for mere mortals was only the blink of an eye for him. Thus the clock on the wall was covered with black velvet, just like all the mirrors in the house, each of which was a gate to the unknown. She cannot push any more, said one of the women present. Then we'll have to do it for her, said the midwife resolutely, but her eyes gave away the fear she was hiding. The midwife put her hand straight through Nays until she felt the sleek, slippery baby squirm under her fingers. There was a faint heartbeat, like a sputtering candle that had reached its end. Gently but firmly, she tried to turn the baby inside the womb. Once. Twice. She was more relentless the third time, acting with a sense of urgency. The baby moved clockwise, but it was not enough. Its head pressed against the umbilical cord, dangerously stifling the amount of oxygen that went through it. Nays had lost so much blood she was fading in and out, her cheeks the color of winter. A choice had to be made. The midwife knew it would be either the mother or the baby. There was no way she could save them both. Her conscience was as silent as a moonless night, and just as dark. All at once, she made up her mind. She would pick the woman. At that moment Nays, lying there with her eyes clamped shut, dancing with death, bleeding umbrage, lifted her head and yelled, "No, you whore." It was a cry so shrill and forceful, it didn't sound as if it had come out of a human being. The woman in bed had turned into a wild animal, famished. and feral, ready to attack anyone who stood in her way. She was running in a thick forest where the sun cast shimmering gold and ochre reflections on the leaves, free in a way she had never been before. Those within hearing distance suspected she had lost her mind. Only the mad could scream like that. "Cut me, you bitch! Take him out," Naze ordered, and then laughed, as if she had already crossed a threshold beyond which everything was a joke. "It's a boy, don't you see? My son is coming. You spiteful, jealous whore. Take a pair of scissors. Now! Cut my belly open and take my son out." Swarms of tiny flies whirred in the room, like vultures circling a prey. There was too much blood everywhere. Too much rage and resentment. Smeared on the carpets, the sheets, the walls. The air inside the room had become heavy, listless. The flies. If only the flies could be made to disappear. Naze did not survive. Nor did the baby for long, the baby whose gender she had been wrong about the whole time. Her 9th infant, the child who killed her and then quietly passed away in her cot, was another girl. So on that day in November 1962, as she lay awake in her maternity bed, late into the wee hours, it was the thought that God could be so arbitrary that distressed Pem. Here she was, only 17 and already breastfeeding a son. She couldn't help suspecting that from somewhere in the heavens, under a watery light, her mother was watching her with envy. 8 births, 5 miscarriages, 1 dead baby, and not one was a son. And here you are, already giving a healthy boy to my harebrained daughter. Why, Allah? Why? Naze's voice echoed in Pem's ears until it became a ball of fury that rolled down to her chest and nestled in her stomach. Hard as she tried to fend off her anxieties, she ended up only building new ones. They drew circles in her mind, spinning like a peg top, and suddenly there was nowhere to hide from the evil eye that was her late mother's gaze. Once she started paying attention to it, she noticed that gaze everywhere. It was in the grain and cashew nuts that she pounded in a stone mortar, turned into a paste and then consumed to enrich her milk. It was in the rivulets of rain that streamed down the window panes, in the almond oil that she applied to her hair at every bath, and in the thick, bubbly yogurt soup that simmered on the stove. Allah the Merciful, please make my mother shut her eyes in her grave. And make my son grow up strong and healthy, Pem prayed, rocking herself back and forth, as if it were she who needed to be put to sleep, not the baby. Asterisk. The night Iskandar was born, Pem had a nightmare, as she had had many other times during her pregnancy. But this one felt so real that a part of her would never recover from it, never return from the liquid land of dreams. She saw herself lying supine on an ornamental carpet, her eyes wide open, her belly swollen. Above her a few clouds slithered across the sky. It was hot, too hot. Then she realized the carpet was stretched over water, a rowdy river swirling under her weight. How is it that I'm not sinking, she thought to herself. Instead of an answer, the sky opened up and a pair of hands descended. Were they the hands of God? Or the hands of her late mother? She couldn't tell. They cut open her belly. There was no pain, only the horror of being aware of what was happening. Then the hands pulled out the baby. It was a plump little boy with eyes the color of dark pebbles. Before Pem could touch him, let alone cuddle him, the hands dropped the baby into the water. He floated away on a piece of driftwood, like the prophet Moses in his basket. Pem shared the nightmare with only one person, her eyes bright and burning as she spoke, as if she had a fever. Jamila listened, and, either because she truly believed in it or because she wanted to free her twin of the terror of Naza's ghost, she came up with an explanation. "You must have been jinxed. Probably by a jinni." "A jinni," Pem echoed. "Yes, sweetheart. The jinn love to take a nap on chairs and sofas, don't you know? Adult jinn can make a dash for it when they see a human coming. But infants are not so fast. And pregnant women are heavy, clumsy. You must have sat on a baby jinni and crushed it." "Oh, my God." Jamila twitched her nose as if she had caught a foul smell. "My guess is the mother must have come for revenge and put a spell on you. But what am I going to do?" "Don't worry, there's always a way to appease a jinni, no matter how enraged," said Jamila authoritatively. And so, while Pem was nursing her newborn, Jamila made her toss dry bread to a pack of stray dogs and rush away without looking back, throw a pinch of salt over her left shoulder and a pinch of sugar over her right, walk through newly plowed fields and under spiderwebs, pour sacred rosewater into every cranny in the house, and wear an amulet round her neck for 40 days. She thus hoped to cure Pem of her fear of their late mother. Instead, she opened the door to superstitions, a door Pem had always known existed but through which she had never before ventured to go. Meanwhile Iskandar was growing. His skin the color of warm sand, his hair dark and wavy and gleaming like stardust, his eyes brimming with mischief and his birthmark long gone, he smiled copiously, winning hearts. The more handsome her son grew, the more Pem became terrified of things over which she had no control: earthquakes, landslides, floods, wildfires, contagious diseases, the wrath of Naza's ghost, the vengeance of a mother jinni. The world had always been an unsafe place, but suddenly the danger was too real, too close. Such was Pem's unease that she refused to give her son a name. It was a way of protecting him from Azrael, the angel of death. If the baby had no particular affiliation, she thought, Azrael would not be able to find him, even if he wished to. Thus the boy spent his first year on earth without a name, like an envelope with no address, as well as his second, third, and fourth years. When they had to call him, they would say, "Son," or "Hey, lad." Why didn't her husband, Adam, object to this nonsense? Why didn't he take control of the situation and name his heir like every other man did? There was something holding him back, something stronger than his quick temper and male pride, a secret between the two of them that empowered Pem and weakened Adam, pushing him away from home towards an underground world in Istanbul, where he could gamble and be the king, even if only for one night. Not until the boy had turned 5 did Adam take the reins in his hands and announce that this could not go on forever. His son would soon start school. And if he did not have a name by then, the other children would make sure he had the most ridiculous one imaginable. Grudgingly, Pem complied, but only on one condition. She would take the child to her native village and get her twins and family's blessings. Once there, she would also consult with the 3 village elders, who, by now, were as old as Mount Ararat, but still dispensing sage advice. Asterisk. "It was wise of you to come to us," said the first village elder, who was so frail now that when a door slammed nearby its vibration shook him to the core. "It is also good that you did not insist on naming the baby yourself, like some mothers do nowadays," remarked the second elder, who had only one tooth left in his mouth, a little pearl shining out like the first tooth of a toddler. The third elder then spoke, but his voice was so low, his words so slurred, that no one understood what he said. After a bit more discussion, the elders reached a decision: a stranger would name the boy, someone who knew nothing about the family and, by extension, Naza's specter. With a borrowed confidence, Pem agreed to the plan. A few miles away there was a stream that ran low in winter and frantically high in spring. The peasants crossed the water in a makeshift boat attached to a wire that had been stretched between the two banks. The journey was unsafe, and every year a few passengers would fall into the river. It was decided that Pem would wait where the boat landed and ask the first man who got across to name her son. The village elders, meanwhile, would hide behind the bushes and intervene should the need arise. Thus Pem and her son waited. She was attired in a crimson dress that reached below her ankles and a black lace shawl. He was wearing his only suit and looked like a miniature of a man. Time crept by and the child got bored. Pem told stories to entertain him. One of those stories would stand out in his memory forever. When Nasreddin Haja was a boy, he was the apple of his mother's eye. Did she have apples in her eyes? He asked. That's an expression, my sultan. It means she loved him very much. The two of them lived in a nice cottage on the outskirts of the town. Where was the father? He had gone off to war. Now listen. One day his mother had to go to the bazaar. She said to him, "You should stay at home and watch the door. If you see a burglar trying to break in, start shouting at the top of your voice. That'll frighten him away. I'll be back before noon." So Nasreddin did as he was told, not taking his eyes from the door for even a moment. Didn't he have to pee? He had a potty with him. Wasn't he hungry? His mother had left him food, pastries, and sesame halva, Pem said, knowing her son well. After an hour, there was a knock at the door. It was Nasreddin's uncle, checking on how they were doing. He asked the boy where his mother was and said, "Well, go tell your mother to come home early and prepare lunch for us. My family will stop by for a visit." But he is watching the door. Exactly. Nasreddin was puzzled. His mother had advised him to do one thing and his uncle another. He didn't want to disobey either of them. So he pulled up the door, saddled it on his back and went to get his mother. The boy chuckled, but he quickly grew serious. "I wouldn't do that. I would always choose my mother over my uncle." No sooner had he said this than they heard a noise. Somebody had crossed the stream and was walking towards them. To Pem's and the village elders' surprise, it turned out to be an old woman. She had a spectacularly aquiline nose, hollows under her wrinkled cheekbones and a set of crooked teeth. Her small, beady eyes constantly moved, refusing to settle anywhere. Pem told her that her son urgently needed a name and asked if she would kindly help, avoiding details like Naza's ghost or the village elders waiting behind the bush. The old woman didn't seem the least bit surprised. Leaning against her staff, she weighed something up in her head, calm and compliant, as if a request of this kind was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Mum, who is this?" the child asked. "Hush, my lion. This nice lady here is going to give you a name. But she's ugly." Pretending not to hear that, the woman took a step closer and scrutinized the boy. "So you haven't found your name yet, I gather." The child raised his thin eyebrows, refusing to comment. "All right, well, I'm thirsty," she said, pointing to where the watercourse had formed an inlet. "Will you go and get me a cup of water?" "I don't have a cup." "Use your palms, then," the old woman insisted. With a deepening frown, the boy glanced at the woman, then at his mother. And then at the stranger again. "No," he said, a new edge to his voice. "Why? Don't you go and get your own water? I'm not your servant." The woman tilted her head to one side, as if the words were a blow she had to dodge. "He doesn't like to serve, does he? He only wants to be served." By now Pem was convinced that they had picked the wrong person. To appease the situation, she said in her most conciliatory tones, "I'll go and get you water." But the woman didn't drink the water Pem brought to her, cupped in the palms of her hands. Instead she read it. "My daughter, this child will remain a boy for a long time, and he will grow up only when he has reached midlife. He will mature very late." Pem gasped. She had the distinct impression that the woman was about to give away a secret, something she wasn't supposed to reveal. Some children are like the Euphrates, so fast, so rowdy. Their parents cannot catch up with them. "I'm afraid your son will break your heart to pieces." The words fell between them like a stone hurled from out of nowhere. "But that's not what I asked you," Pem said, a bit tensely. "Have you thought of a name for him?" "Yes, I have. There are two names that might suit him well, depending on what you expect. One is Salem. Once upon a time there was such a sultan. He was a poet and a fine musician to boot. May your son, too, learn to appreciate beauty should he be given this name." "And the other?" Pem held her breath with anticipation. Even the boy seemed interested in the conversation now. "The second is the name of the great commander who always marched in front of his soldiers, fought like a tiger, won every battle, destroyed all his enemies, conquered land after land, united the East and the West, the sunrise and the sunset, and was still hungry for more. May your son, too, be invincible and strong-willed, and preside over other men should he be named after him." "This one is better," said Pem, her face brightening up. "Well, then, you are done with me." With that, the old woman grabbed her staff, and started to walk away down the road with a surprisingly agile gait. It took Pem a few seconds to collect her thoughts before she ran after her. "But what is it? What is what?" The woman turned and studied her, as if she had forgotten who she was. "The name. You didn't tell me what it was." "Oh. It is Iskandar." "Iskandar. Iskandar," Pem repeated with delight. When they returned to Istanbul, the boy was registered at the office of the local registrar. Though several years late, with a lot of pleading and a substantial bribe, his existence was legally accounted for. The name written on his card when he started school was Iskandar Toprak. A name worthy of a world leader, Pem said. By then she had learned who Alexander the Great was. So it was that her first child, the apple of her eye, would become Iskandar in Kurdish and Iskandar in Turkish. When the family immigrated to London, to the children and teachers in his school, he was Alex, and this was the name he would be known by in Shrewsbury Prison, by convicts and guards alike. A Prince in the Tree. Istanbul, 1969. The spring when he was not yet 7, Iskandar ran away from a man whom he had never seen before but had heard much about. Although the man was different from what he had imagined, this made him no less frightening. He had thick-rimmed glasses that slid down his nose, an unlit cigarette between his lips and a large leather bag that was rumored to contain sharp instruments and a piece of skin from each of his victims. At the sight of him, Iskandar felt a bolt of fear shoot along his spine. He spilled the cranberry sherbet in his hand, red drops trickling onto his white shirt, like blood on snow. He tried to wipe off the stain, first with his bare hands, then with the hem of his cape. It was no use. His beautiful costume was ruined. Stain or no stain, he was still a prince in his long silvery cape and his cap studded with sparkling beads, carrying a scepter so polished it was almost translucent. Throughout the afternoon he had sat in a high chair like a nobleman inspecting his lands, though being a bit short for his age all chairs were high for him. To his left were 4 boys, older and taller but similarly attired. As if sizing them up for a fight, Iskandar had studied them from head to toe and decided their costumes were not as impressive as his. While the other princes gobbled sweets and cracked jokes, Iskandar waited, jiggling his legs. How could they be so silly when they knew what was about to happen? His eyes strayed anxiously. There were many people in the room, but he was certain that none would come to his rescue, not even his mother, Pem, especially not her. She had wept all morning, telling him how proud she was that her little boy was becoming a man. For that is what you became when you were circumcised, a man. Iskandar couldn't understand for the life of him how he would become a man with one cut of a knife. It was a riddle hard to solve. With less you became more. Nor could he fathom why he was told not to cry, though it was clear he would be hurt, while his mother could weep to her heart's content. Though absolutely nothing was happening to her. Out of the corner of his eye he watched the man with the leather bag, noticing a scar that ran from his left cheek to his jaw. Perhaps one of the boys on whom he had operated had given him the wound. For a minute he indulged the idea, imagining how, just when the man was about to circumcise him, he would free himself of the hands holding him down, snatch the blade and slash his tormentor's right cheek. Then he would help the other boys to their feet. And together they would dash for the door, victorious. But the fantasy faded away and the room came alive again, a blind Hafiz reciting the Quran, a woman serving tea and almond paste, the guests chatting in hushed tones, and his most feared moment moving dangerously closer. Slowly, Iskandar slid down in his chair. His feet touched the floor, the carpet opening up beneath his weight. He took a step and held his breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to ask him where he was going, but no one did. He tiptoed past the double bed that had been placed in a corner, wrought iron headboard, embroidered pillows, amulets against the evil eye and a satiny, cobalt blue bedspread. Blue was Iskandar's favorite color. It was the color for boys, which meant the sky was a boy. So were the rivers and lakes. And the oceans, though he had yet to see one. Feeling lighter and bolder with each step, he sneaked through the back door. Once outside he began to run, picking up speed as he made his way across the garden, around the well, down the gravel road, past the neighbors' houses, up the hill. His costume was soiled but he didn't mind. Not anymore. Iskandar thought of his mother's hands, combing her wavy, chestnut hair. Making yogurt in clay cups, caressing his cheeks, molding figurines out of pastry dough. Until he reached the oak, he contemplated these images and nothing else. It was an old tree that had roots running in 4 directions above the ground and branches extending towards the billowing clouds. His breath coming in gasps, he began to climb, fast and focused. Twice his hands slipped and he almost tumbled down, but each time he regained his balance. He had never been this high before and felt disappointed that there was no one to see his achievement. From up here the sky seemed so close he could almost touch it. Beneath a blanket of clouds, he sat with sweet satisfaction and pride, until he realized he did not know how to get down. An hour later, a blackbird perched a few feet away. It was an exquisite creature with yellow rings around its eyes and touches of crimson, bright as rubies, on its wings. It chirped once, timid and frail but full of life. Had the bird come any closer, Iskandar could have caught it between his palms and listened to its tiny heartbeat against his skin. He could have sheltered the bird, loved and protected it, but in one swift movement he could also have broken its neck. No sooner had this thought crossed his mind than he felt a pang of remorse. There were huge cauldrons in hell, bubbling away for those who nursed such sinful thoughts. His eyes watered. He had been confident that his mother would notice he had gone missing and send out a search party, yet no one was coming. He was going to die here, perish of cold or hunger. What would people say when they learned that he had died not because of illness or accident, like everyone else seemed to do, but because of cowardice? Perhaps they had looked for him in all the wrong places and assumed he was gone. Perhaps they thought he had been attacked by wolves, not that there were any in the area. He imagined a terrible death savaged by the claws and teeth of ferocious animals. Would his mother be devastated, or would she secretly rejoice at having one less mouth to feed? Thinking about his mother's cooking made him realize how hungry he was. More urgently, he had to pee. Unable to contain himself any longer, he pulled down his trousers and held his willy, the cause of all his distress. He had barely started to relieve himself when he heard someone shout, "Hey, he's up there. I've found him." In a few seconds a man appeared, then another, then 10 more. They stood by the tree, watching. Under their gaze, Iskandar kept peeing as if his bladder had expanded to twice its usual size. Finally he pulled up his zipper and was considering asking for help to get down when he noticed that among the crowd was the man with the leather bag. That was when the strangest thing happened. Iskandar froze. His limbs went slack, his tongue went numb, and in place of his stomach was a rock. He could hear people beseeching him to get down, but he could not respond. He sat motionless, as if he had become a part of the tree. An acorn boy. At first the onlookers below suspected he was playing dead, eager to get more attention. Only when they understood he wasn't pretending, that the child was somehow paralyzed, did they start contemplating how to bring him down. A man began to climb but couldn't get as far as the lateral branch where Iskandar was perched. Another tried his skill, with equal lack of success. Meanwhile, others were busy holding blankets for the boy to fall into or making lassos, though no one knew exactly what to do with them. Nothing worked. Ladders were too short, ropes too thin, and the boy uncooperative. Just then a voice cut through the air. "What's he doing there?" Pem shouted, as she scurried up the hill. "He can't get down," someone explained. "Oh, can't he? He's a big boy." Pem was frowning at her son's stick-thin legs dangling over the branch. "Get down here this minute." Like ice melting under the sun, Iskandar felt his entire body thaw. "Come down, you rascal." You've shamed your father. All the boys have been circumcised. You're the only one who acted like a baby. Try how he might, Iskandar still couldn't shift his body. Instead he looked down and grinned. Perhaps if he made light of the situation, lighter it would become. It was a mistake. All the pressure that had been mounting inside his mother gushed into a stream of fury when she saw him grin. You spoiled brat. Come down this minute or I'll break your bones. Don't you want to be a man? Iskandar gave this some thought. No, he said finally. If you remain a boy you'll never have your own car. He shrugged. He would walk everywhere. Or take the bus. Nor your own house. Iskandar attempted another shrug. He would live in a tent like he had seen gypsies do. Nor a pretty wife. A puzzled expression came over Iskandar's face. He wanted to have a wife, someone who resembled his mother but never scolded him. He chewed his lip, brooding. After what seemed an endless wait, he dredged up the will and the strength to look down into her eyes, dark and green like two strands of ivy, gently but firmly pulling him towards her. All right, Pem said, sighing. You win, I lose. You won't be circumcised. I'll not let anyone lay a hand on you. Promise. Promise, my sultan. Her voice was warm, reassuring. As she spoke, Iskandar found his panic oozing away. He moved his fingers, then his toes, and managed to descend a few branches, to where a man was waiting on the highest rung of a ladder that had been propped up against the tree. When he was safely on the ground, again, he ran to his mother, sobbing out loud. My son, Pem said, as if it needed to be verified. She hugged him so tightly he could feel her heart beating through her chest. Malamine, my sultan. Iskandar was happy to feel the earth beneath his feet, happier still to have been missed this much by his mother, and yet there was something suffocating about her embrace, sickly sweet. Her lips against the side of his neck, her breath, her clutch enclosed him like a coffin. As if she had read his mind, Pem grabbed the boy by the shoulders, pushing him back so that she could stare him in the eye, and slapped him hard. She said, do not ever shame me again. Half turning to the man with the leather bag, she added, take him. Iskandar's face went pale. He was more surprised than distraught. His mother had deceived him in front of everyone. And slapped him. He had never been hit by her before. The possibility had never even occurred to him. He tried hard to speak, but words had become like marbles, clogging his throat. In the evening everyone commended Iskandar for being brave during the circumcision. They said he hadn't shed a single tear. But he knew his performance had nothing to do with courage. Because he was still thinking about what his mother had done and why she had done it, he hadn't fretted over the operation. Never had it occurred to him that you could deceive the person you held dear. Until that day, he hadn't known that you could love someone with all your heart and yet be ready to hurt them. It was his first lesson in the complexity of love. The Wish Fountain. A place near the river Euphrates, 1977. Pem was gone now, her mirror image, her reflection in still waters. She slept under a different sky and every so often sent Jamila letters and postcards with pictures of red, two-tiered buses and immense clock towers. When she came home for a visit, her clothes smelled differently, and felt soft to the touch. That was the part that struck Jamila the most, watching her sister open her suitcase, bringing in aromas, tastes, and fabrics from foreign lands. Pam had left with the unspoken assumption that everything would be as it was upon her return. But nothing had remained the same. Nor had she come back for good. For years Pam had been sending Jamila letters, telling her about her life in England. The children, too, jotted down a few lines every now and then, Eunice more than anyone else. Jamila kept these missives in a tin tea box under her bed, like hoarded treasure. She wrote back regularly, although she had less to tell, or so she believed. Recently she had asked Eunice if he had seen the Queen and, if so, what she looked like. He had responded, "The Queen lives in a palace. So big. She gets lost in it. But they find her and put her on her throne again. She wears a different dress every day, and a funny hat. It has to be the same color as the dress. Her hands are soft because she puts on gloves and lots of creams, and she doesn't wash the dishes. I saw her pictures at school. She seems nice." Jamila could not understand how the family had been on that island for so long but still not set eyes on the Queen, save in magazines and newspapers. Sometimes she doubted whether Pam had ventured from the neighborhood where she lived at all. If she always ended up confined between walls, what was the use of her traveling to a faraway country? Why couldn't human beings live and die where they were born? Jamila found big cities suffocating, and was daunted by the thought of unknown places, the buildings, the avenues, the crowds pressing on her chest, leaving her gasping for air. In her letters, usually towards the last paragraph, Pam would write, "Are you angry at me, sister? Could you forgive me in your heart?" But she already knew what the answer would be. Jamila was not angry with her twin, or with anyone else. And yet Jamila was also aware that the question had to be asked over and over, like a wound that needed to be dressed regularly. They called her Kiz Ebe, the virgin midwife. They said she was the best midwife this impoverished Kurdish region had seen in 100 years. Pregnant women felt relieved when she was in charge, as if her presence would ensure an easy labor, keeping Azrael at bay. Their husbands would bob their heads knowingly, and say, "The virgin midwife is in command. Everything will go well. Thanks first to Allah, then to her." Such words amounted to nothing, they only deepened Jamila's fear of not living up to people's expectations. She knew she was good, as skilled as one could get before starting to decline from old age, poor eyesight, or sheer bad luck. Like every midwife, she was aware of the danger of her name being uttered in the same breath as the name of God. When she heard the peasants speak such blasphemy, she would murmur to herself, "Tav, Tav, asterisk." They didn't have to hear her, it was enough that God did. She had to make it clear to him that she was not coveting his power, not competing with him. The one and only life-giver. Jamila knew what thin ice she was walking upon. You thought you were experienced and knowledgeable until you came across a delivery that filled you with dread, making you almost like a novice again. Every now and then, something would go wrong, terribly wrong, despite her best efforts. At other times she couldn't make it to a labor in time, and when she arrived would find that the mother had just given birth on her own, sometimes even having cut the umbilical cord with a blunt blade and tied it with her hair. Jamila took these incidents as signs from God in which he was reminding her of her limitations. They came from distant villages and forsaken parishes to fetch her. There were other midwives closer to their homes, but they sought her out. She was quite popular in this part of the world. There were dozens of girls who had been named after her. Enough beauty. May she carry your name and be half as chaste as you, prayed the fathers of the girls she brought into this world. Jamila nodded, saying nothing, conscious of the insinuation. They would like their daughters to be modest and virtuous, and yet they wanted them to get married and have children in due course. Their daughters' names and dispositions might be similar to the midwife's, but their fates had better be different. Approaching the window, a knitted shawl on her shoulders, a lamp in her hand, Jamila squinted into the dark. Under the deep mantle of the night, the valley was sleeping, bare and barren, bleary with tangled bushes and arid soil. She had always imagined a softness beneath this harsh landscape, which she likened to a rough man who hid a tender heart. Still, she didn't have to live on her own in so remote a place. She, too, could have gone somewhere. Anywhere. Not that she had the means or any relatives who were willing to help her start anew elsewhere. Already 32, she was past her prime and beyond proper marriage age. It was too late for her to start a family. A dry womb is like a melon gone bad, fine on the outside, desiccated inside. And good for nothing, the peasants said about women like her. Even so, she could marry a disabled or elderly man, just as she could agree to become someone's second wife, or third or fourth, though that was rare. Only the wife who had been married first was legal, of course, and could go to a hospital or courtroom or a tax register office and claim to be a married woman with legitimate children. But in this part of the country, no one went to such places anyway, so long as you weren't in serious trouble or dying of an infection or out of your good mind, in which case what difference would it make whether you were the first wife or the fourth? Her house, if house was the right word for this shack, was nestled in a hollow near a ravine in the outer reaches of Malakar Bayan. Down below, one could see a cluster of rocks that resembled petrified giants from afar and glowed like rubies when the sun cast its rays on them. There were many legends about these rocks, and behind every legend a story of forbidden love. For centuries Christians and Muslims and Zoroastrians and Yazidis had lived here side by side, loved and died side by side. Their grandchildren, however, had long ago left for other lands. All but a handful of peasants remained in the area, and Jamila. Deserted places that once teemed with life had a kind of sadness, a ghost grief, which floated in the breeze, seeping into every crevice. Perhaps that was why, after a while, the people of derelict landscapes resembled the places themselves, silent, subdued and sullen. But that was what lay on the surface, and with people, as with the earth, the surface was rarely the same as the core. Underneath the layers of clothes that she wore to keep herself warm, there was another Jamila, young, pretty, jovial, with a laugh like the tinkling of glass upon glass. She rarely went out these days, hiding behind the practical woman who chopped wood, scythed the fields, drew water and made potions. At times she feared for her sanity. Perhaps this much loneliness had finally got to her, nibbling away at her mind little by little. When the wind blew in from the faraway mountains, it carried with it the aromas of wild flowers, fresh herbs, and blossoming shrubs. But at times it also brought a cloying smell of roasted meat that hovered over everything, clinging to her skin. There were smugglers and brigands in the area, wandering about the caves and precipices, never staying in any one place for more than a day. On moonless nights she could see their campfires twinkling in the dark like forlorn stars. The smells in the air altered depending on what they were eating and how close they came. There were wolves too. Jamila could hear them during the day, late in the evening, deep in the night. They would snarl and growl, and sometimes yip in high-pitched barks or howl in tandem. Every so often they would appear on her doorstep, so close and furtive, sniffing her solitude. Then they would leave, their jaws set in a scowl, looking disappointed, as if they didn't find her inviting enough to feast upon. Jamila wasn't scared of them. The wolves were not her enemies, and, as for the bandits, they were interested in bigger rewards than her. Besides, Jamila took heart in her belief that danger always came from where it was least expected. The smoldering heap in the fireplace stuttered to life when a twig caught fire. Jamila's face glimmered, even though the rest of the house was sunk in shadow. She suspected the peasants didn't love her, but they did respect her. Traveling on horse, donkey and mule, she was allowed to set foot in places no other woman could enter. She was often accompanied by people she knew, but also by complete strangers. A man she had never seen before might knock on her door late at night and plead, "Come quickly, I beg you. My wife is giving birth in the village of so and so. We need to hurry. She's not doing well." He could be lying. There was always the possibility, however slight, of evil disguising itself. As she followed the man into the still of the night, Jamila was aware that he could kidnap, rape and kill her. She had to trust not him but him. Yet it was also true that there were unwritten rules nobody in his right mind dared to violate. A midwife, someone who brought babies into this world, was semi-sacred. She dangled between the invisible world and the visible one, on a thread as delicate as a strand of spider's silk. Feeding the flames in the fireplace with more wood, Jamila put the copper seive on the fire. Water, sugar and coffee, all these items were in short supply. But families brought her presents all the time: henna, tea, biscuits, saffron, pistachios, peanuts, and tobacco smuggled from the other side of the frontier. Jamila knew that if she had received money, she would have been paid once and that would have been it. But if you were paid in trinkets, such giving went on for a lifetime. She mixed the coffee carefully, gently. Coffee was like love, they said. The more patient you were with it, the better it would taste. But Jamila didn't know much about that. She had been in love once, and it had tasted sour and dark. Having scalded her tongue, she never spoke of it anymore. As she kept her eyes on the rising foam, she pricked her ears to sounds near and beyond. The valley was alive with spirits. There were creatures here no bigger than grains of rice, imperceptible to the naked eye but potent and perilous nevertheless. Birds tapped on the windows, insects bounced off the water in the buckets as if skittering across the surface of a lake. Everything had a language, she believed. The thunderstorm, the morning dew, the ants crawling in her sugar bowl. Sometimes she thought she understood what they said. She loved nothing more than she loved being a midwife. It was her mission, her one fortune. So it was that in the fog, or scorching sun, or 30 inches of snow, any time during day or night, she was on call, waiting for the knock on her door. This nobody knew, but in her heart of hearts she was married already. Jamila was married to her destiny. Asterisk. Outside, the night wind rattled against the window panes. Jamila took the coffee off the flames and poured some into a small earthenware cup with a chipped handle. She drank it in slow sips. The fire was a bit like her life. Smoldering within, not letting anyone come too close, precious moments. Burning into embers, like dying dreams. Far away a bird cried out, an owl, which the locals called the mother of ruins. It hooted again, this time more boldly. Jamila sat there with her eyes clamped shut, her thoughts wavering. Despite the hardships, she remembered her childhood as a happy one. At times one of the twins would pretend to be the mummy and the other the infant. Though older by 3 minutes, Pem would always be the baby while Jamila would be the mother, trying to constrain, control, and comfort her. She would rock her little one, singing lullabies, telling stories. Looking back on those games, Jamila was surprised to see how serious they had been. She recalled how once her father, Burzo, took them to a town where they discovered a wish fountain. Women who longed to have babies, mothers-in-law who wanted to put a spell on their daughters-in-law, and virgins who yearned for well-to-do husbands came here, tossing coins into the water. When everyone had left, Pem rolled up her hems, climbed into the fountain, and collected the coins. Then they both ran, as fast as they could, shrieking with excitement, to the closest shop, where they bought boiled sweets and sticks of rock. Much as Jamila enjoyed the adventure, she felt guilty afterwards. They were thieves. Worse. Stealing people's wishes was far more despicable than stealing their wallets. Don't be sentimental, Pem said, when Jamila revealed her worries. They had already let go of those coins and we pocketed them, that's all. Yes, but there were prayers attached to them. If somebody had stolen your secret wish, you would be upset, no? I mean, I would. Pem grinned. So what is your secret wish? Jamila faltered, feeling cornered. True, she wanted to get married some day, a wedding dress and a buttercream cake like those they made in the city. Would be wonderful, but it wasn't that important. She would love to have children, but was that because she really yearned for them, or because everyone told her she should? It would be nice to own a farmhouse and cultivate the land, but it was a fancy rather than a passion. As she thought harder, Jamila was glad that she was only a thief and not a visitor at the wish fountain. If she had been given a coin to make a wish, she might not have come up with one. At her hesitation, Pem scoffed, her eyes aglow. I'm going to be a sailor and travel the world. Every week I'll wake up in a new harbor. Jamila had never felt more alone. She understood that as identical as they were in all respects, there was one vital difference: ambition. Pem wanted to see the world beyond the river Euphrates. She had the nerve to pursue her heart, and not pay attention to what others thought about her. For a sinking moment it dawned on Jamila that she and her twin were bound to spend their lives apart. Their father said identical twins were as blessed as they were damned. They were blessed because they would always have someone to count on. Yet they were also damned, because should one of them suffer despondency, they would be destined to suffer together and, therefore, twice as much. If that were the case, Jamila wondered, what was likely to cause them more pain, her sister's passions or her own apparent lack of them? Memories. London, December 1977. As he took a handful of oatmeal biscuits off the conveyor belt and placed them inside the next tin box, Adam Toprak had a revelation: he could not remember his mother's face anymore. He stopped for a moment, gooseflesh sweeping up and down his body, a pause that caused him to miss the next cluster of biscuits. Bilal, standing several feet down the assembly line, noticed the mistake and quietly covered it up. Had Adem realized what had happened, he would have given his friend a grateful nod, but in that moment, he was still trying to recall what his mother used to look like. There was a woman in the back of his mind, distant and hazy, as if she were standing in a fine mist. She was tall and slim, her face like marble, her pale eyes calm, concerned. A wedge of sunlight from a latticed window fell on the back of her head, leaving half her face in shadow. Her hair was coppery brown, the color of autumn leaves. But as the light dimmed, it changed to a shade so dark it appeared ink black. Her lips were full and round. Perhaps not, Adem could not be sure. Perhaps she had thin lips that turned down at the corners. The woman seemed to change every second. Hers was a face sculpted out of melting wax. Or perhaps he was confusing the memory of the woman who had borne him with the image of his wife. The long, wavy, chestnut hair that he now saw belonged to Pem, not to his mother, Aisha. Had his wife become such an inseparable part of his existence that she eclipsed all his memories, even those from a time before they had met? He shifted his weight from one foot to another and closed his eyes. Another recollection came. He and his mother were in an emerald green field that overlooked a dam. He must have been 8. His mother had let down her hair, which Istanbul's notorious Poyraz asterisk kept blowing about her face. Ahead of them, the sky was a generous blue, flakes of gold, pewter and silver skittering across the faraway hills. Of the dam's numerous gates only a few were open, and the lake level was low. The boy felt dizzy as he watched the waters churning beneath them. Any other day his mother would have warned him not to get so close to the edge, but oddly not that day. Shaitan waits on the ledges to pull down whoever gets too close. That's why they fell all the time, toddlers who leaned over balcony railings, housewives who stepped on windowsills to clean the windows, or chimney sweepers who clomped about near the eaves. Shaitan would clutch their ankles with his claws and yank them down into the emptiness below. Only cats survived because they had 9 lives and could afford to die 8 times. Hand in hand, they had walked down the hill, until they reached the huge walls that sloped all the way down one side of the dam. Aisha sighed at the top of the gully, her lips moving. She seemed to have forgotten that the evil one loomed close. Or perhaps not, because, once he concentrated on what she was saying, the boy realized she was praying to ward off misfortune. No doubt. He was relieved, but only momentarily. What if the devil were hiding somewhere behind the bushes, ready to push them into the void? With a sudden impulse, he pulled his hand from his mother's and glanced around, until he was certain there was no one else there. When he turned his head again, she wasn't by his side. Bit by bit, second by second, he watched her fall. Asterisk. Adem opened his eyes to find Bilal staring at him with something akin to alarm on his face. "What's going on, man?" Bilal asked over the clatter of the machines. "You've missed more than a dozen batches." "Nothing." Adem put his right hand to his heart and patted. "I'm fine." Bilal's smile was slow but genuine. Nodding, he went back to his work. As did Adem. During the rest of the afternoon he managed to tackle every single biscuit. But those who knew him well could sense something was niggling him. Outside his control, beyond his power, an aching unease was crawling in the depths of his soul, sinister as a storm cloud. He knew what it was, the fear of a cornered animal. He felt hounded, ground down, as if injected with a poison that didn't kill but slowed the prey. Wherever he turned he could see his predator's shadows. There was nowhere to escape, unless he left England for good. But he could not abscond, with his children and wife relying on him. And if he wanted to take his family with him, he would have to find money. A lot. He was stuck. The Chinese were aware of this too. That's why they didn't even bother to check on him every day. They knew they could find him whenever they wanted to, whenever he skipped a payment. But there was another reason why Adam couldn't go anywhere. Roxana. Asterisk. 6 weeks ago, Adam had woken one morning to a sensation of exhilaration. An elevation so intense it was like soaring in a dream. The portents were there. The signs had never betrayed him before. His palms were itchy, his heart was beating faster than usual, his left eye twitching ever so slightly. Nothing bothersome. Just a faint tick that came and went, like a coded message from the skies. An ordinary day in other respects, but the feeling stayed with him. All afternoon everyone was polite to him and he was polite to everyone. It was a fine, sunny day, and the sky's reflection in the Thames was vivid and full of promise. After sunset he went to the gambling den. One day soon, not long from now, he would stop doing this. He would break the habit, chop it off his body, as if he were pruning a sick branch from a healthy tree. Just as it was impossible for the tree to regrow the branch, he would never have the urge again. But not now. He wasn't ready to give it up quite yet. For today it's all right, he assured himself. Today the signs are favorable. It was the basement of a double-fronted terraced house in Bethnal Green, resplendent with age. Inside it was a different world, though. There were 5 rooms, in each of them men played snooker or gathered around roulette, blackjack or poker tables. The air was thick with smoke. Those with more money or less fear were in the room at the back. From behind the tightly shut door one could hear the murmurs, the occasional gasps and grunts, and the rattle of the roulette wheel. It was a place for men. The few women who minced around were already spoken for and therefore unapproachable. There were unwritten rules here that everyone obeyed. Indians, Pakistanis, Indonesians, Bangladeshis, Caribbeans, Iranians, Turks, Greeks, Italians. Everybody spoke English, but swore, conspired, and prayed in his mother tongue. The lair, they called it, run by a taciturn Chinese family who had lived in Vietnam for generations and been forced to leave after the war. Adam always felt uneasy next to them. The Chinese were not protective of each other like the Italians, nor were they temperamental like the Irish. There was always an unknown quality to their demeanor. A bit like the weather, they were prone to changing on a whim. That evening Adam played blackjack and a few dice games, and then moved to the roulette wheel. He placed his first bet on black. It was an auspicious start. Next he did a combination bet. He won again, but the amount was not much. He switched to red and won thrice in a row, each time leaving his winnings from the previous bet on the current one. It was one of those magical moments when he could feel the roulette wheel. Just like him, the wheel lacked a solid memory. You could place the same bet over and Over, and your chances of winning would still be the same. Roulette didn't observe any recognized patterns. So he played without memory, concentrating on every new bet as if it were his first and his last. The men in the room gave him a thumbs up, patted him on the shoulder, and muttered words of encouragement. It was a remarkable feeling to be respected by strangers, to be admired and envied. He played another round, still triumphant. Now the crowd around the table had thickened. 15 minutes later he was still watching the ball spin around the wheel, still winning. The dealer asked for a break. In need of fresh air, Adem stepped out into the street. There was a tall, hulking Moroccan he knew from the factory, sitting by himself on the pavement. "You're a lucky man," remarked the Moroccan. "Kismet. Not every day is like this. Maybe Allah is testing you." The man paused, giving him a cursory glance. "You know what they say. He who wants to ride a fast horse could break his back, but the horse has to gallop." "What the hell does that mean?" "I don't know, but I like the sound of it." They laughed, their voices carrying in the night air. "Here's a good one," said Adem. "One can flee to the end of the world, but one cannot run away from his behind." Ahum. The Moroccan was about to raise his glass when he noticed his companion's empty hands. "I don't drink," Adem said by way of explanation. This elicited a chuckle from the other man. "My, oh my. Look at you. You're hooked on gambling, but when it comes to booze you turn into a pious Muslim." Adem's face closed down like a trap. He was not an addict. He could stop playing whenever he wanted. As for his reasons for not drinking, it was something he rarely talked about, especially with strangers. But tonight he made an exception. He said flatly, "My father was a heavy drinker." No sooner had he returned to the basement than the lights went off. Another power cut. The third this week. These days London was grey in the mornings with rain clouds, black in the evenings with shutdowns. That candle shop in Hackney must be raking it in, Adem thought. There was good money in wholesaling candles, a business that had become as vital as selling bread and milk. Adem strained his eyes through the half-lit corridor, until he reached the room at the back. There were 3 Chinese at the table, sulking by a paraffin lamp, men of few words and impenetrable expressions. Adem knew it was time for him to leave. He had to be satisfied with what he had earned. He grabbed his jacket, tipped the dealer, and was about to walk out the door but then stopped. Later on, whenever he recalled this moment, which he would do fairly often, he would think of the emergency handles on trains. He had never tried pulling one, but he knew if someone did, the train would come to a sudden halt. That night he had stopped as if there were such a handle attached to his back and someone had tugged and tugged on it. A young woman had entered the room, like an apparition from the shadows. In the faint lamplight her sandy hair had an uncanny glow, curling below her ears, small and delicate. Leather miniskirt, white silk halter top. Stiletto daggers on her feet. Every inch of her heart-shaped face sent out the message she was not pleased to be there, she'd rather be somewhere far away. He watched her sit next to one of the Chinese, a bald, portly man who acted as if he were the boss, and perhaps he was, and whisper in his ear. The man smiled a half-smile and caressed her thigh. Something tore inside. Adem. So, you are still here. You want to play another round, my friend? This man had asked the question without raising his head or looking at anyone in particular. And yet Adam knew, as did all the people in the room, that the question was directed at him. He could feel the gaze of each person. But it was her eyes that pierced him, a pair of blue sapphires. He had never seen eyes that big, bright and blue. If his wife had met this woman, she would have feared the evil eye. For Pem believed that if someone with such eyes stared at you, even for a moment, you had to run back home and burn salt on the stove. Adam's face was aflame. He saw in that precise moment that he was about to commit the worst mistake in gambling, if not in life, to let yourself be provoked. But understanding this was one thing, accepting it quite another. With a tilt of his head, he answered, "Yes, I'll play." He pulled it off again, though it was different this time. The energy around him had changed. He and the roulette wheel were two separate entities now, no longer in sync. Yet he didn't budge. He remained planted in his seat, watching the goddess watch the ball spin. The lights came on. He took this as a good sign and continued to bet. He gained again and then again. The stakes were high. It was dangerous. It was insane. The Chinese tried to look unperturbed, but their nervousness was beginning to show. Among the crowd, Adam caught the eyes of the Moroccan. His brow furrowed in anguish. Shaking his head, the man mouthed, "Enough, brother." But Adam couldn't quit. She was staring at him from the other end of the table, her lips like cherries, full and inviting, and he felt the possibility, a chance in 1,000, but a chance nevertheless, of winning her heart if he kept on winning at roulette. Seconds later he heard someone call her, and that's how he found out her name, Roxana. Straight up bet. He placed all his chips on the number 14. The ball spun counter to the wheel, like the two tides in his life, family and freedom, pulling him in opposite directions. A chorus of sighs rose from the onlookers, ripples of water reaching the shores. Now the ball made a jolt, before finally landing in a slot. The wheel moved through another full turn. Her face lit up with amazement and appreciation, and something that he likened to admiration. He didn't need to look to know that he had won. That was when one of the Chinese muttered under his breath, but in a loud enough voice, "Don't you have a family waitin', my friend? They must be worried for you. It's getting late." The hidden warning and the word family drew a thick curtain between him and the roulette, him and the room, him and her. Adam plunked the chips in a box, cashed them in and strode out. An acquaintance gave him a lift half of the way and he walked the remaining half. There were piles of rubbish on the streets of East London, rotting waste was strewn everywhere, randomly scattered. The world had gone berserk. Everyone was on strike: firemen, miners, bakers, hospital workers, bin men. No one wanted to play the game anymore. No one but the gamblers. It was 4 a.m. when he reached the house on Lavender Grove. He smoked on the sofa, the cigarette turning to ash between his fingers, the pile of money warm and loyal next to him. 16,400 pounds. Since everyone was sound asleep, he couldn't tell his family about his victory. It would have to wait. He lay wide-eyed in the dusky living room, seized by a sense of loneliness so profound as to be insurmountable. He could hear the rasp of his wife's breathing, and his 2 sons, daughter, even the goldfish, all wrapped in a mysterious serenity. This he had noticed while doing his military service back in Turkey. When more than 3 people slept in a narrow place, sooner or later their breaths would become synchronized. Perhaps it was God's way of telling us that if we could just let go of ourselves, we would all eventually be in step. And there would be no more disputes. The thought was new to him and he enjoyed it for a while. But even if there was a harmony somewhere, he could not be part of it. It occurred to him, the way it had on other occasions, that he was a man just like any other, no better and no worse, but that he was failing the people he cared about. He wondered, for the umpteenth time, whether his own flesh and blood would be better off without him. Unable to sleep, he left the flat at dawn. He carried the money with him, though he was aware that it was a foolish thing to do. Hackney was full of muggers and thieves who would not mind breaking his ribs for such a large sum. His walk changed to a lope, and he flinched and went cold each time a stranger approached him on the street. At the United Biscuits factory he was treated like a king. They had all heard. During the lunch break his brother Tariq popped in to congratulate him, and to ask for a favor. "You know how my wife is," Tariq said, his voice dwindling to a confidential whisper. "She's been nagging me forever about the kitchen." Tariq had a theory about British kitchens, that they were deliberately made tiny and gloomy so that everyone would have to make do with takeaways. The architects were accomplices in the conspiracy, and so were the politicians, the councils and the unions, all duly bribed by the restaurant owners, and on went his diatribe. Adam nodded amiably, even though he sensed his elder brother would borrow from him as much as he could, and, after spending a limited amount on his kitchen, would keep the rest in his savings account. Tariq was always hoarding and scrimping. It was hard to believe this was the same man who in his youth had generously supported his 2 brothers. When their father passed away, Tariq had worked hard, taking care of Adam and Khalil. Over the past years, however, he had become increasingly frugal, snipping toothpaste tubes to squeeze the last drop, clipping coupons from circulars, switching off the water heater, reusing the tea leaves, getting everything secondhand and forbidding his family to buy anything without asking him first, though when they did he always answered, "There's no need." Drawing in his breath, Adam said, "Do you ever think of our mother?" On an ordinary day Adam could never have brought himself to speak like this. But now that his brother had asked him for a favor, he felt he had the upper hand. He deserved to hear a few memories in return for a handout. Yet, the question was so unexpected that for a moment Tariq seemed at a loss as to how to answer it. A deep wrinkle formed between his brows, extending towards his forehead, where there were several white patches, a skin disease from childhood. When he spoke his voice sounded hard, gruff. "Why would I do that? She was a good-for-nothing. Don't you want to know if she's alive, whether she had other children? How she's doing, whether she ever missed us?" Adam wanted to ask and almost did. Instead, into the ensuing hollow of silence, he said thickly, "I'll stop by your house tonight and bring you the money. Tell my sister-in-law. She'll have her dream kitchen." After sunset, it occurred to him that if he gambled and won again, he would have twice the money he had now. Then he could lend money to Tariq and to others, and wouldn't even have to ask for a penny back. Motivated by a noble cause, he went to the basement in Bethnal Green and saw the woman with blue eyes. Again he watched her watch the ball spin around the wheel. Again he played big. And he lost everything. Shrewsbury Prison, 1990. I had never stammered before in my life until that Tuesday. The 14th of November 1978. The day I decided to get myself a knife. We were in the school canteen. Me and my mates. Blue plastic trays, shepherd's pie, jam roly-poly, metal jugs of water, the usual. Patter. 1 minute I was making jokes, the next I was tripping over words like a prat. It happened just that suddenly, so fast that everyone thought I was having them on. We were talking about the next day's game. Chelsea were playing Moscow Dynamo. Arshad, a short, stocky Paki who dreamed of playing defense for Nottingham Forest, said he would bet his new Doc Martens that our boys in blue were going to win a walk in the park, he said, but we all knew it was just bollocks. Upset at not being taken seriously, Arshad turned to me with a twinkle in his eye and grinned, like he always did when he wanted something. Hey, you gonna give me that puddin'? I shook my head. NN. Not on yo. You're. NN. Me. Nelly. FO. 4. Get. ITT. He stopped and stared. Others did too, as though they were seeing me for the first time. Then someone mentioned this twat in another class who stuttered so badly nobody talked to him. Assuming I had been mocking him, they broke into laughter. I laughed too. But deep inside I felt a surge of panic. I pushed my tray towards Arshad and gestured with my head that he could have what was left. I'd lost my appetite. When the break was over, I returned to the classroom in low spirits. How could I have developed a speech impediment, just like that? Nobody in my family stammered. Weren't these things supposed to be genetic? Maybe not. It could be a blip, a one-off. A temporary psych out, like a bad trip. Maybe it would go away as suddenly as it had appeared. I had to find out. So I put my watch in my pocket and approached 2 girls to ask the time. But the only thing that came out of my mouth was a strangled sound. The girls giggled. Airheads. They must have thought I had a crush on them. I turned away, my face burning. Out of the corner of my eye I could see my girlfriend watching my every move. When the history class started, Katie threw me a note. Maggie, Christine, Hillary. If boy. Tom. I crumpled the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Immediately. She hurled another ball. What's up with you? I shrugged, meaning it was nothing important. But even if Katie got the message, she didn't look convinced. So I wrote her back, tell you later. Throughout the entire class, I was worried sick the teacher would ask me something. I would become the butt of jokes forever. Fortunately, there were no questions. As soon as the torture was over, I grabbed my rucksack and headed to the door. I decided to blow off the rest of my classes and go home early for once. Asterisk. It was 3:30 when I raked our house and rang the bell. As I waited for the door to open, my eyes slid to the name beside the doorbell. Adam Toprak. My sister, Esma, had written this in her flowery handwriting. Against her better judgment. We live here as well, she grumbled. Why write only Dad's name? Esma was a frail girl, but she always expressed herself with giant ideas: equal opportunity, social justice, women's rights. My friends thought she was either barmy or a communist. If it were up to her, She would have written instead. The Toprak family. Or else. Adem, Pem, Iskandar, Esma, Eunice and the goldfish. Either way I didn't give a toss. I, myself, would have left the nameplate anonymous. That would have been more decent, more straightforward. It would be my way of saying nobody lived here. Not really. We didn't live in this flat, only sojourned. Home to us was no different than a one-star hotel where Mum washed the bed sheets instead of maids, and where every morning the breakfast would be the same: white cheese, black olives, tea in small glasses, never with milk. Arshad might someday play in League Division 1, for all I knew. He could fill his pockets with pictures of the Queen and his car with gorgeous birds, but people like us would always be outsiders. We Topraks were only passers-by in this city, a half-Turkish, half-Kurdish family in the wrong end of London. I rang the bell again. Not a peep. Where on earth was Mum? She couldn't be at the Crystal Scissors. She had quit her job days ago. I was the head of the family since Dad had gone off, and I didn't want her to work anymore. She cried a lot but didn't resist. She knew I had my reasons. People were gossiping. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So I told her to stay home. I had to put out the flames. Nobody at school was aware of what was going on. And I wanted it to stay that way. School was school, home was home. Katie didn't know a thing either. Your girlfriend was your girl, your family was your family. Certain things had to be kept separate. Like water and oil. It occurred to me that Mum might have gone to get the shopping or something. I had to have a word with her about that too. I took out my key, put it in the keyhole and turned it back and forth, but it didn't budge. The door was bolted. Suddenly I heard footsteps down the corridor. "Who is it?" came my mother's voice. "It's Emmem." "Me, Emmem." "Mum." "Iskandar, is it you?" There was a trace of panic in her voice, as if something bad were about to happen. I heard a whisper, low and rapid, and I knew it wasn't my mother. My heart started to pound and I felt the air go out of me. I could neither move forward nor go backward, so I kept struggling with the key. This went on for another minute, maybe more, then the door opened. My mother stood blocking the entrance. Her lips were curved up in a smile, but her eyes were oddly sharp. I noticed a strand of hair had come out of her ponytail, and one of the buttons in her white blouse was in the wrong hole. "Iskandar, my son," she said. "You are home." I wondered what surprised her more, that I was home almost 3 hours early or that I was her son. "Are you all right?" my mother asked. "You don't seem well, my Sultan." "Don't call me that," I wanted to say. "Don't call me anything." Instead I took off my shoes and pushed past, almost knocking her over. I went straight to my room, slammed the door and put a chair in front of it, so that no one could get in. I climbed up on the bed, pulled the sheets over my head and concentrated on breathing, the way they had taught us in boxing class. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Outside, there were secretive noises, the floorboards creaking, the wind blowing and a drizzle falling on the city. Amid the mixture of sounds, I could hear our front door opening and someone stepping outside, quiet as a mouse. She used to love me more than anything, Her first child, first son. Ronia Chaveman, everything was different now. Ruined. A tear rolled down my cheek. I slapped myself to stop it. But it didn't help. I slapped again, harder. I listened to her feet coming down the corridor, soft and steady as heartbeats. She stopped by my door but didn't dare to knock. I could sense her movements, touch her guilt, smell her shame. We waited like that for God knows how long, listening to each other breathe, wondering what the other might be thinking. Then she was gone, as if she had nothing to say, no explanation owed, as if my opinion didn't count anyway, or my anger, or my pain. She walked away from me. That's when I knew what Uncle Tariq had told me about my mother was true. That's when it occurred to me to buy the knife. Wooden handle, folding blade with a curved point. Illegal, of course. Nobody wanted to get into trouble with the old bill by selling a flick knife. Especially to a bloke like me. But I knew where to get one. I knew just the man. I wasn't gonna hurt anyone. I only wanted to scare her, or him. Iskandar Toprak.